Hello 520 students and welcome to the Lesson 7 overview. I'm just going to quickly talk you through what's coming up in this lesson, what we're going to be working on this week, and then also talk a little bit about your final project, which I know you guys are all working on in the background along with keeping up with weekly assignments. Okay, so in Lesson 7, we are going to talk and focus our attention on assessments and ideas related to assessments. And so you're going to read 2 chapters from the SciOp book, one about assessment and one about ELLs who are also maybe in need of special education services or even response to intervention services, and even thinking about what happens with ELLs who are also gifted students, right? So you're going to kind of think about ELLs not just as language learners, but as students who might also encounter any of these other situations where they are in need of support for a different reason. So reading about the Chapter 9 assessment chapter from SciOp, and that's going to talk a lot about not just formal assessments and summative assessments, but also informal and formative assessments. And as you're reading these things, you can be thinking about going back to your RSA SciOp lesson plan, right, where we're going to talk about you finishing up that assignment this week, but going back to parts 1 and parts 2, especially those ideas of like guided practice and comprehension checks, and thinking about what did we read here in this SciOp chapter about review and assessment that we can then go back to and use to modify, adjust, make better some of the ideas we've already included in part 1 and part 2. Okay, so that's the reading from SciOp this week. You're also going to read 2 different articles. One is Words Beneath Their Words, about experiences doing writer's workshop with English language learners. And then the other is about English language learners in special education and kind of thinking about, maybe before we assess the child, we look at what kind of programs the students have been exposed to or integrated into. So does the program or does the problem lie with the student or does the problem lie with the program? And so those are the 2 articles that we're going to be reading this week. So you know that as you do your readings in class, you also have PowerPoint presentations that you'll be viewing. And a lot of the PowerPoint presentation content this week deals with assessment, right? And so that's going to help you kind of be another balance towards that Chapter 9 review and assessment, and also thinking about what assessment means for students that are in need of multiple services. So check that out. And then you'll be participating again in a discussion this week, like we do every week, right? And so 1 discussion board this week, but with 2 questions. The first has to do with what type of feedback should we be giving to students and why, in your opinion. The other deals with thinking about your teaching practices, right? And what you've learned this far in terms of assessment and assessment practices. What type of assessments and assistance with assessments are available at your school or at your site level, right? And how do you think these are used for designing appropriate instruction for students? You can think about assessments that are typically used with your students and whether or not those assessments were geared towards or normed for ELLs. And if we're using a lot of assessments that were not normed or geared towards ELLs, how might that assessment data offer an inaccurate, view or illustration of what our language learners can do? So as always, you're going to respond to these 2 prompts, and then you're going to go back in and read and respond to peers' posts as well. So that's the discussion board for this week. Even though, I can't see the RSA assignment. All right, so because I'm not a part of an RSA team, I'm going to have to find a way to, let me navigate this for just a minute. Okay, so I'm going to get out of this really quick and come back to, let me see, still not letting me. Okay, let me see if I can get to our RSA. Let me try it one other way because I want to be able to talk about what's going on in the RSA assignment this week as well. All right, here it is. Okay, so we took a break from the RSA lesson plan assignment in lesson 6, but now that we're back in lesson 7, this is the chance where you guys are going to submit the 3rd and final part for your plan. And so one thing that I want to just remind you guys all of, because a few of my groups didn't do this, is When you submit part 3, you also need to have in your submission part 1 and part 2 so that we as the instructional team can see the entire plan that you've been working on. Okay, so make sure that when you submit part 3, it's attached and you have the entire lesson plan, part 1, part 2, and part 3 all together. Okay, so you want to do the reading first, right? You want to read the chapters from SIOP for sure, and then read over what's required for the part 3 template, and then be ready to talk with this with your group. It's always a good idea, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, is to start with what you've already written for part 1 and part 2 and think about how you know, what you want to change or modify based on the readings this week, right? So you have chances to go back and make changes to parts 1 and part 2 to better it now that you've read this chapter on review and assessment. Okay, and so then here, you're also going to work on your part 3, right? So you're going to work on what's required for part 3 and make sure that you divvy up those tasks and work on them collaboratively for submission. Once you're ready to submit, remember to combine all sections, right? Parts 1, 2, and 3, put them all together. And then one person from your team will submit your assignment. All right, so we've talked about the discussion. Let's now get to the reflection for this week. Okay, so for the reflection this week, you're going to read and respond. You're going to read 2 articles, but for your reading reflection, you get to pick one that you're going to respond to. So you either could do the Worlds Beneath Words about the Writer's Workshop with ELLs, or you could respond to the article about ELLs in special education and taking a look at programs before we assess students. And so you can pick which one you want to do. So you're going to take one of the 2 articles from this lesson and write your reading reflection from there. Remember, you can do a journal, like a text, essay type response, Word formatted, or you can do a PowerPoint. You can do a Prezi. You could record a video of yourself responding to the reading. Be creative if that suits you. We love seeing the creative flair that you guys are using and the tools you're using to respond to these readings each week. I have one student that's doing a really great job of bringing in pop culture as an analogy or a metaphor for some of the things that they're learning out of the readings. And so it's just a very interesting way to, show how you're responding to the pieces that you're reading. So continue to be creative as it suits your needs for your responses. Okay, the last thing that I want to show you is I'm going to come back over here to major assignments, because the other thing that we're all working on this week is getting ready for our final project submission, which happens in lesson 8, okay? So back up here in the major assignments tab, I've just scrolled back down to final project, right? And so you guys know that either you're doing an oral history project where you have found somebody to interview and you're also conducting a literature review based on your research question and sub-questions, or you're doing a project which is an entire literature review, right? So either way, whether you're doing the oral history project, option 1, or conducting a lit review, option 2, you all have to be reviewing literature, right? And so again, please review these 3 links up here at the top for ideas for how to conduct a literature review and how to write them up. Remember, your literature review should not, big X's, should not be a summary of every piece of literature you read, right? What it needs to be is after you've read all the literature, you rearrange the concepts in the literature by categories. And you say, here's one big idea that came out of the literature. And then you bring in ideas from a few different pieces of literature or books or articles, journals to support that idea. Here's another concept that came out of the literature review, right? So it's more of a conceptual overview based on your understanding of the literature. It is not an article by article, book chapter by book chapter summary of what you read, all right? And if you're doing an oral history project, you're also taking the ideas from your interview and weaving those into the conceptual categories as well. So you're going to think about how the literature has ideas that support some of the things that your interviewee said, or when those ideas are contradicting or clashing up against each other. The other tool that I've added this week is this last one here at the bottom, the APA paper template. I know some of you, it's been a long time if you haven't used APA format since you were back in high school and this is your first master's class. And so this paper template here is just going to be an overview of how to format your paper using APA formatting, okay? And here's the other thing that you can do, you guys. Remember, you can go to File, you can make a copy, and you can, just use this template for the form. I mean, it's already set, right? So you've got your header 1, you've got your indentation, the font's the right size. You can replace this for your title. It's got your level 2 headings, right? So here's all your level 1 heading, your level 2, here's your level 3. So it's going to take you through back to level 1 again. So it's going to take you through all the formatting rules that you need for your paper. And so feel free to reference this doc or make a copy and just replace what's there with your ideas. So that's an additional resource that I've added this week to help you on your journey of submitting an awesome final project for our class. This week, as you continue to work on your final project, work on your drafts, start bringing your literature into conceptual categories and thinking about how you're going to display it. If you have questions, reach out to the virtual office for your groups or send your instructor an email if it's more personal in nature, and we'll support you throughout the week. I hope you guys all have an awesome week, and I look forward to seeing what your projects entail next week.